7 days after burying my wife, I sat at the same dining table where we'd celebrated every Christmas, every birthday, every milestone. Her chair was empty, but across from me sat my daughter Laura and her husband Jason. Jason leaned back like he owned the place. Laura twisted her wedding ring eyes fixed on her plate. Then Jason said it, cold, deliberate. "Now that Margaret's gone, it's time for you to leave this house. For good." I didn't speak, not yet. I just looked at him, at the man I'd helped buy his first home, the man whose failed business I'd rescued twice, and felt something inside me shift. Laura stayed silent. My little girl. The same child who once cried if she stepped on a flower. Now she couldn't even meet my eyes. Jason smirked. "You don't need a place this big, Harold. We could make better use of it." The fork in my hand trembled. On the table beside my plate lay Margaret's wedding ring. I'd set it there earlier to keep it close. Now it felt like a reminder. Of love lost, of promises broken. I put the fork down, straightened my back, and smiled just enough for Jason to see. We'll see about that. And if you've ever witnessed cruelty dressed up as family concern, you're going to want to hear how this story ends. If you believe in real justice, stick with me. Better yet, subscribe now so you won't miss what comes next. Scottsdale, Arizona, May. The late afternoon sun poured over the quiet streets where tall saguaro cacti stood like silent guards. I sat alone on the wooden chair out on my porch. This house has been mine for 23 years. It's where Margaret and I raised our only daughter, Laura. Where laughter used to fill every dinner. Where Margaret's rose garden bloomed through every season. Now, it's just silence. Margaret is gone. 7 days since her funeral. The house still smells like her perfume, but the space in my chest, nothing can fill it. I thought Laura would be here after the funeral, that we'd hold on to each other the way family should. But Laura isn't the same. Not since she married Jason, the man who runs Desert West Construction. Ever since then, the distance between us has only grown wider. I'm not a rich man. I worked 35 years in banking. I saved, carefully lived modestly. But for my family, I never held back. I paid for Laura's college tuition. I gave her the down payment for their first house. I even wrote the check that saved Jason's company when it was about to collapse. I believed one thing: family takes care of family. It's the code I've lived by my whole life, and I thought Laura believed it too. What I didn't know was that soon my own daughter and her husband would try to force me out of the very home I built. And when they did, they would find out exactly how dangerous a man like me can be. Laura wasn't just my daughter. For most of her life, she was my shadow. When she was little, she'd curl up in my lap during thunderstorms. We'd sit in the living room, her tiny hands clutching mine until the thunder passed. I thought that kind of bond was unbreakable. But things change. They changed the day she met Jason. At first, I tried to see the good in him. He was charming enough, ambitious, that he wanted to take care of my daughter. But I'd spent decades in banking. I can read people. And Jason, he always looked at life like it was a poker game. Always calculating the next hand, always thinking about the next win. When they married, I wanted to believe it was love. But even then, I noticed the subtle shifts. Phone calls became less frequent. Family dinners, fewer and fewer. And when they did come over, the conversation always seemed to drift toward money. Over the years, I helped them more than I care to admit. $89,000 for Laura's degree. $65,000 for the down payment on their first home. Another $23,000 for their wedding, a wedding Margaret insisted we make perfect. And then there was the $38,000 to keep Jason's construction business afloat. I told myself it was family duty, that they'd remember every sacrifice when the time came. But lately, I'd noticed something in Laura's voice. Less warmth, more distance, like she was measuring me, and finding me less useful than I used to be. I didn't know it then, but the first cracks in our relationship had already begun to split wide open. It was a quiet Sunday evening. I'd made roast beef Margaret's recipe the way she used to. I set the table, even put fresh roses from her garden in the center. For a moment, I almost believed it would feel like old times. Laura and Jason arrived right on time. Jason took his seat at the head of the table, my seat without a second thought. Laura sat beside him, eyes down, twisting her wedding ring. We started eating. Small talk, weather, Jason's work, nothing unusual. Until he set his fork down and leaned back in his chair. "Harold," he said, "we need to talk." His voice was cold, measured. Laura didn't look up. Jason glanced around the dining room like he was inspecting property. This house. "It's too big for one person. You don't need all this space." I told him I'd lived here for 23 years, every brick, every beam, paid for with my own 2 hands. "That's exactly my point," he said, smiling without warmth. "It's time for a change. Laura and I need a bigger place. We could make better use of this one." I looked at my daughter. She still wouldn't meet my eyes. Then Jason delivered the final blow. "Now that Margaret's gone, grieve, pack your things, and don't come back." I felt the air leave my lungs. Not from shock, but from clarity. Something inside me shifted. Not broken, but hardened. I set my fork down, straightened in my chair, and I smiled just enough for him to notice. "We'll see about that," I said. I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice, didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me hurt. Instead, I pushed my chair back slowly, folded my napkin, and stood. "I see," I said. 2 words. 2 words that carried 38 years of marriage, 23 years in this house, and 7 days of grief they had just weaponized against me. Jason smirked like he'd won something. "We'll help you look at senior living places tomorrow," he said. I put on my jacket, walked past the table without another word. The front door clicked shut behind me, quiet, but final. The evening air bit at my face as I stepped onto the porch. I looked back at the window's warm light spilling into the night. My house, my life, my family, or what used to be my family. I walked to my car. Every step measured, every breath steady. But I didn't drive home to pack. I drove to the one place I knew I'd find Clarity Desert Community Bank. The same bank where I'd worked for 35 years. The lobby was dark now, closed for the night, but I didn't need to go in yet. I just sat there in the parking lot, hands on the wheel, staring at the glass doors. Jason and Laura thought they could corner me while I was grieving. They thought I'd be too weak to fight back. They had no idea that I'd spent my entire career learning exactly how to dismantle people. Quietly. Legally, permanently. By the time I drove away, my mind was already outlining the first steps. This wouldn't be an emotional fight. It would be an execution plan. The next morning, I put on my Navy suit, the same one I wore to client meetings for over 2 decades. Not because I needed to impress anyone, but because I wanted to remind myself who I was. When I walked into Desert Community Bank, it felt like stepping back into my old life. The smell of fresh coffee, the faint hum of printers, familiar faces I'd worked alongside for years. Harold Miller, the receptionist, said, smiling, "It's been too long." "I need to see James Morrison," I replied. "It's about a financial matter." James had been my colleague for 15 years, sharp, discreet, and thorough. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in his corner office, sunlight spilling across polished oak. I need to know my financial exposure, I told him. Specifically, any loans I've guaranteed for Laura or Jason. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. The pause that followed told me everything. Harold, the mortgage on their house is 3 months behind, and there's a home equity line you co-signed for $45,000 maxed out. I hadn't even known about that line of credit. And Jason's business, I asked. James exhaled. Defaulted on a $78,000 equipment loan. Filed for bankruptcy 2 weeks ago. I leaned back in my chair, letting the numbers settle in. They hadn't just taken my money. They'd buried themselves in debt and dragged my name into it. Can you prepare full documentation, I asked. Of course, James said. By the time I left the bank, I had exactly what I needed. A map of every weak point in their financial lives, and I knew exactly where to strike first. Back home, I spread the bank documents across my desk. Mortgage arrears, maxed out credit lines, business defaults. It was a disaster, and I knew exactly how to use it. Years in banking had taught me a truth most people never learn. Debt isn't just a burden, it's a leash, and the one holding the leash controls everything. First, I highlighted every account with my name on it. As a co-signer, I had legal rights, the right to demand full disclosure, the right to intervene, even the right to call in certain debts. Jason and Laura had never imagined I'd use those rights against them. Then I made a list of my old contacts, loan officers, credit managers, insurance agents. People I'd once helped close deals, save accounts, push approvals through. The same people who now owed me favors. By the time the sun dipped behind the desert hills, I had my strategy. It wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be messy. Every move would look like the natural consequence of their own decisions. Step 1, quietly ensure no bank in the city would touch them. Step 2, bring Jason's shaky construction company under the sharp eye of regulators. Step 3, let the pressure build until they had nowhere to turn but back to me. I poured myself a scotch, staring at Margaret's photo on the mantel. They think they've won, I murmured. They have no idea. This wasn't just about keeping my home anymore. It was about teaching them that betrayal comes with a price, and I was going to make sure they paid it in full. The next morning, I started making calls. Not long conversations, just enough to plant seeds. "Morning, Margaret," I said to the loan officer at First National. "Quick heads up. Jason Morgan's debt-to-income ratio is climbing fast. Multiple missed payments. I'd think twice before approving anything substantial." Margaret trusted my judgment. She always had. Her polite "thanks for letting me know" told me everything. Jason's name would now have a quiet red flag next to it. By noon, I'd spoken to 3 more banks. Each conversation sounded casual. Each one ensured that when Jason or Laura applied for credit, the answer would be the same no. Credit is a funny thing. Once the denials start, they snowball, scores drop, interest rates spike, and suddenly, you can't borrow your way out of trouble. I didn't stop there. I called an old friend at Southwest Insurance Group. Asked about Jason's business coverage. Turns out his premiums were already late. 1 more missed payment and they'd be obligated to notify the bonding company. That kind of notice spreads like wildfire in the construction world. Every word I spoke was factual. Every move completely legal. But together, they formed a wall Jason wouldn't even see until he slammed into it. By the end of the day, their financial oxygen was cut off. No loans, no credit lines, no safety net. They wouldn't feel it immediately. That was the beauty of it. The real panic would hit in a week or 2, when they realized the money had stopped flowing. and by then I'd be ready with the next squeeze. 2 days later, I shifted my focus from their personal finances to Jason's livelihood. In construction, a company's survival depends on 3 things: permits, insurance, and reputation. I knew exactly where to hit all 3. First, stop the city planning department. I met Bob Henley for coffee. Bob had been a senior inspector for 20 years before retiring. He still had friends in the right offices. Jason Morgan, I said casually, runs Morgan Development. I'm thinking about hiring them for a project, but I've heard there might be compliance issues. Bob raised an eyebrow. Nothing major yet, but I've seen safety plans rejected, insurance paperwork submitted late. That's risky. Risky was exactly the word I wanted floating through the department. Next, I called Sarah Adams at Municipal Licensing. Asked her the same due diligence questions. By the end of the call, Jason's name was on the radar of every clerk who could delay a permit. Finally, I forwarded public records, nothing confidential, nothing false, showing his company's late payments to subcontractors. I sent them to a few old colleagues who now worked in commercial lending. Just something to be aware of. In this business, whispers spread faster than invoices. One flagged permit can stall a project for weeks. Delayed payments drive subcontractors to other jobs. Soon, cash stops flowing, and the whole operation grinds to a halt. Jason wouldn't know where the trouble started. All he'd see was a sudden wave of inspections, delays, and questions from clients. By the time he realized the walls were closing in, it would be far too late to dig himself out. And I was just getting started. It started with small signs. Jason's truck parked in their driveway in the middle of the workday. A longer than usual silence before he answered his phone. The kind of restless pacing a man does when he's trying to solve a problem with no solution. I didn't have to guess. I knew the symptoms of a company bleeding out. Late permits meant stalled projects. Stalled projects meant subcontractors walking away, and once the crews leave, good luck getting them back. From my car, parked half a block away, I watched him step outside, phone pressed tight to his ear. His hands were moving fast, sharp, the way they do when a man's trying to convince someone not to quit. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but in presence. The swagger was gone. Later that afternoon, he drove off only to return with 2 small boxes from a pawn shop. Selling personal items. Liquidating for cash. Classic desperation move. I didn't feel sorry for him. Not after what he'd said to me. Not after the way Laura had sat there and let him say it. That evening, I took a walk past their house. Through the open window, I caught fragments of their conversation. Her voice was sharp, almost frantic. His was low defensive. The words money bank and foreclosure cut through the night air like nails on glass. It was happening. The pressure was building exactly as I'd planned. And soon the real breaking point would come. When it did, they'd have no one left to turn to, except me. And that's when I'd name my price. It was a Friday evening when the doorbell rang. Not the casual kind of ring, the kind that holds hesitation, maybe even shame. When I opened the door, Laura was standing there. Eyes, red voice, trembling. Jason lingered a step behind her shoulders, tight jaw locked. "Dad, can we come in?" she asked. I stepped aside. No smile, no warmth. Just enough courtesy to let them cross the threshold. We sat in the living room. I took my usual chair. Martha's chair beside me stayed empty, a silent reminder of who wasn't here to see this. Laura started first. "We're in trouble. The mortgage is past due. Jason's work has slowed down. We just need a little help to get through the month." "A little help," I repeated, keeping my voice even. "Define a little." Jason shifted in his seat. 15,000. enough to catch up on payments and cover some bills. I leaned back, studying them. 2 weeks ago, they were ready to throw me out of my own home. Now, they were here asking for a lifeline. What happened to all that confidence? I asked quietly. Laura's eyes darted to Jason. He stayed silent. You think this is about money, I continued. It's not. This is about choices, and you've both made yours. Jason's jaw tightened. You have the money. Why not help your own family? I let the question hang. Then I said, because family doesn't betray family. You taught me that, not the other way around. The room went silent. They realized, maybe for the first time, that I wasn't here to rescue them. Not yet. They left my house without another word. No handshake, no promise to try again. Just the heavy sound of the front door closing behind them. Through the window, I watched them walk to the car, Laura wiping her face with the back of her hand. Jason staring straight ahead like he was already somewhere else. The engine started, but they sat there for a long moment before pulling away. Over the next week, I saw the cracks widen. Jason's truck was gone for hours but never came back with materials or paychecks. Laura made more calls from their driveway, her voice rising in sharp bursts, hands flying in frustration. I knew exactly what was happening. Their creditors were circling. The banks weren't answering. The subcontractors were refusing new work until old invoices got paid. It was the slow-motion collapse of people who'd run out of road. Then, one afternoon, I saw Jason at the pawn shop again. This time, he didn't come out with a box. He came out empty-handed, which meant he'd run out of things worth selling. By Thursday, the shouting from their house was loud enough for the neighbors to hear. I stood in my garden, pruning roses, pretending not to notice. I didn't need to hear the words. I already knew the script: blame, desperation, fear. They were right where I wanted them, teetering on the edge of losing everything. And soon they'd be back at my door. Not with demands, not with conditions, but with open hands and lowered eyes. That's when the real conversation would begin. It was late Sunday afternoon when the knock came. Not the hesitant tap from last time. This one was firm, urgent, the kind you hear when someone has no more time to waste. I opened the door to see Laura standing alone. Her eyes were swollen, her voice raw. Dad, please, we can't do this anymore. I let her inside. Moments later, Jason appeared in the doorway, moving slower than I'd ever seen him. No swagger, no defiance. Just a man who'd been stripped of every bit of leverage. They sat on the couch without waiting to be asked. Laura clasped her hands together like she was holding on to the last piece of hope she had. We'll do whatever you want, she said. Just help us save the house. Jason nodded, his eyes fixed on the floor. We can sign over collateral pay interest, follow any terms you set. I'll work any job you think I should take. Just don't let us lose everything. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. I let the silence stretch until I could feel them squirm. 2 weeks ago, I began slowly. You told me to leave my own home. You made me feel like a burden. And now you want me to carry yours. Laura's eyes filled again, but she didn't speak. Jason finally looked up. You're right. We were wrong. Completely wrong. I studied them both. The pride gone replaced by raw desperation. This was the moment I had been waiting for. And now I could name my price. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. When you told me to pack my things and leave, you redefined what family meant. Now, if you want my help, the definition changes again on my terms. Laura swallowed hard. Jason didn't move. First, I said I want a written apology. Both of you. Signed, dated, and sent to every relative and neighbor who knows what happened. You will admit you were wrong and that your behavior toward me was cruel. Laura's mouth opened, but I held up a hand. Second respect. That means you don't raise your voice at me, you don't dictate how I live, and you don't touch a dollar I give you without my approval. Jason shifted uncomfortably. Third, financial control. Every cent you earn, every bill you pay, I will see it. I will decide what's reasonable. No exceptions. They were both pale now. Laura's voice cracked. That's a lot. So is saving your home from foreclosure, I said evenly. I pulled out my checkbook, wrote a number, and tore off the slip. 25,000. Enough to keep the bank from taking the house this month, but not enough to let you go back to your old habits. Jason stared at the check like it was a lifeline in a chain. And if we say no, he asked quietly. I leaned back, calm and certain. Then you walk out that door, and you face the storm alone. This is the only offer you'll get. Laura closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. We'll do it, she whispered. Jason hesitated, then nodded once. The deal was struck, but they knew they'd never hold the power again. They came back the next evening with the apology letter in hand. It was short, but every word dripped with the weight of their pride being stripped away. I read it twice, slowly, letting the silence remind them who controlled the pace now. Good, I said, finally setting the paper down. This will do. Jason kept his eyes on the carpet. Laura sat rigid, hands folded so tightly her knuckles were white. I reached into my desk drawer, took out the check, and placed it on the table between us. Neither of them moved to touch it. It wasn't just money anymore. It was the price of their surrender. Remember, I said evenly, this isn't a gift. It's an investment. I expect updates every month. If I see one sign you're slipping back into old habits, I pull the plug. Understood. Yes, Laura said quickly. Jason gave a stiff nod. They stood to leave, but I stopped them at the door. One more thing, I said. You assumed I was weak because I was grieving. You assumed kindness meant I wouldn't fight back. You were wrong. Jason looked like he wanted to say something, but thought better of it. Laura simply whispered, I know. When the door closed behind them, I walked to the window and watched their car disappear down the street. The house was quiet again, peaceful in a way it hadn't been in weeks. I sat in Martha's chair, holding her old photo in my hands. They thought they could erase me, I murmured. But I'm still here. And now they'll never forget it. Justice, I realized, wasn't about anger. It was about control. And I had all of it. When the dust finally settled, the silence inside my home felt different. It wasn't the emptiness of loss anymore. It was the calm that comes after a storm you've weathered and won. I walked through each room, letting my hand brush over the familiar furniture, the photographs, the small things Martha and I had collected over decades. They were still mine. This house was still mine. And no one would ever try to take it from me again. In the garden, the roses were blooming stronger than ever. Martha always said pruning was necessary, that sometimes to keep a plant healthy, you had to cut away the dead parts, even if it hurt. I understood that more than ever now. Laura and Jason weren't gone from my life completely, but they'd learned there was a line they could never cross again. I hadn't shouted, I hadn't begged, I hadn't even needed to threaten. All I did was show them I knew exactly what they valued, and how easily it could be taken away. That's the thing about revenge. It doesn't always look like fire and fury. Sometimes it's cold, calculated, and deliberate. A slow tightening of the rope until the other person realizes they can't move without your permission. And when they finally understand, you don't have to raise your voice. You've already won. Some people think revenge is about settling the score in one explosive moment. They picture shouting matches, slammed doors, dramatic confrontations. But the truth, real justice is quieter. It's precise. It's making sure the people who wronged you wake up every day knowing they'll never have the same power over you again. That's the lesson I learned, and the one I'll never forget. It's not about anger, it's about control. It's about reclaiming your place and making sure no one dares to push you out of it. I share this not because I want pity, but because I know there are others out there, maybe even you, who've been in that same seat. The one where someone you trusted thought they could take what was yours. And maybe, just maybe, you've wondered if it was possible to turn the tables without losing yourself in the process. That's why I tell my story, because I believe there's strength in seeing how others fought back and won. And if hearing this gave you that spark, that feeling in your chest that says, I won't be walked over again, then there's more I want to share with you. This isn't the only time I've stood my ground, and it's certainly not the last. So if you want to hear more stories where the wrong people get exactly what they deserve, and where justice comes dressed in patience and precision, you'll find them here. Just make sure you're subscribed so you're there when the next one unfolds. Because in this life, power isn't given, it's taken back, one story at a time.